at all.
But I'm having a trouble with my camera. Any help?
I don't, but like if you are not able to control it from your side, there is a camera button at the very top. And if it has a cross through it, that means your camera is off. If it doesn't have a cross through it, that means it's on. But it's also not a big problem if you cannot come onto camera, because we're actually getting started with the program right about now. I was just wanting to see a little bit who all was in the room and find out what companies were signed on. Hi, Sharon. Nice to see you in the chat. Oh, and they're in person as well. And it's so good to see some familiar faces, as well as with Venky and Eric we've met. I'm sure there's others that, in the giant array I'm missing. Lorena, you had your hand up for a moment. Did you have a question?
Oh, no, I didn't have a question. I must have been just playing with my controls here. Sorry about that.
Okay, great. So yeah, let's get started here. Just a little bit of housekeeping. It would be fantastic if you put into the chat your name and the business that you are representing, just so that we make sure that we know that you're here. And if we need to reach out to you, that we do have that information. It's really helpful for us to assess how well our Port Gen trainings are going and how well attended they are. So that would be super helpful. Another housekeeping item is if you have any questions, it would be great if you could just pop them into the chat. Josie, who I'll ask to introduce herself in a minute, is going to be helping me take a look at the questions, and towards the end, raise them up for me to answer. You're also welcome to raise your hand at that point. There is a function that has the little button at the top that has a raise hand. If you raise your hand at the very end during the question and answer, we can do that as well once I call on you. So that is kind of how we're going to move forward today. So this is our first Port Gen 101 of the year. This probably is there's going to be a little of something for everyone. It'll be really, really high level. So it might be just a lot of review for some of you, but I hope you'll still find some things that you can take away from this. So with that said, the program for today is that we'll start again with the overview of the port contracting opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit about the three main areas of the port. I'll go into a high level description of what construction needs we have at the port, what the contracting types are there, and then go into our service agreements, also known as consulting, and talk about some of the distinctions that are helpful for you to know in terms of how we categorize them, as well as the contract types there. And then the third of this kind of three-part different kinds of categories that we think about our procurements here at the port is goods and services. And I'll talk about the contracting types. Then I'll wrap up with how it is that you can engage with us and make sure that you're apprised of the opportunities that are relevant to you. Then so that should take around 30 minutes, including a little bit of Q&A after that. Then I'll turn it over to my colleagues, Ron Jimerson and Harold Federau from our information security and information communication technology team, for them to do a brief presentation and a Q&A on what IT looks like here and what opportunities there are. Before I advance, though, I do want to introduce myself, as well as allow my colleagues Josie and Tina to introduce themselves. I'll start first. I'm Emily Ho. If we haven't met already, I am the Community Engagement and Training Program Manager here in Diversity and Contracting at the Port of Seattle. So I manage and oversee all of our Port Gen trainings and our events and networking events, as well as our community engagement efforts. So Josie, would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see so many familiar faces and new ones. And I'm the senior admin here on the team, and I'm just always here to help. And it's nice to see everybody.
Great. Thanks, Josie. Tina, are you there right now?
Yes, I'm here. I kind of lost the volume, but hopefully you can hear me.
Yep, can hear
Okay,
you.
great. I'm Tina Boyd. I've been at the port going on my 27th year. Majority of those years have been in the program. I want to welcome everybody. I'm excited about youth, all of you. There's a little bit of everybody, and I'm primarily talking about consulting and goods and construction. I look forward to meeting all of you. Again, I'm Tina Boyd. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. And do feel free to chime in. I have the pleasure of working with Tina, who's been here for so long, and I've been here for almost a year now. And so to have her expertise and her help along with Josie's is super incredible. So I'm really lucky to have this team. Without further ado, I'll dive into the areas of the port. This is just a really high level overview of the Port of Seattle has a huge economic impact. We've got hundreds of private employers who operate at our seaport, at our airport, and they directly employ tens of thousands of individuals themselves. And so you can see here that the economic value to our region is huge. We've got 16.3 billion in economic activity for international maritime trade, 1.4 billion in commercial fishing, 22.5 billion in the airport. And it also should be said, our construction projects support an average of 1,300 full and part-time jobs every month. And so the point of sharing this is just to say that these are jobs and businesses supporting the port that really make our region so economically diverse. And here at Diversity and Contracting, we are here to continue ensuring that women and minority businesses, as well as small businesses, get some of that work and are able to have some of the financial benefits and experience that is here. And so breaking down these three areas, so we've got aviation. Our airport is probably the thing that we're most closely tied to. And so that's our airport. We've also got a maritime department, which doesn't get as much attention, but still has plenty of work that is available inside of it. The actual assets that it includes are the fisherman's terminal, our marinas, the cruise ship terminals, and it's kind of a big deal. The fishing vessels at our port facilities produce 13% of all of the US's commercial fishing, and we've got a huge cruise traffic that goes through it every year. And then lastly, we've got economic and community partnerships, and I would lump kind of our corporates or more administrative side of the port along with that. My colleagues from IT, who you'll hear from later on, they would fall under that corporate category where it's more about the administration side of the port, making sure that things are going. And so that's a pretty diverse, there's a number of different kinds of lines of business that are within both economic and community partnerships, as well as that larger corporate umbrella. And I also, one other reason why I want to talk about the areas is that where the work is, it within the port, whether it's aviation, maritime, or corporate, sometimes dictates what it is that you need to know or what it is that you need to have. For example, for aviation, there are badging requirements a lot of the time. And so that's one of the big reasons I want to point out that, yes, we're not only the airport, we've got all these other parts of what we do, but also it really does matter and would benefit you to pay attention. Oh, is the work that I'm looking at the airport, is it for maritime stuff or is it for our corporate side of work? And I see some questions popping up. I mentioned earlier on that we'll get to questions and answers at the very end, and Josie is helping me out with the tracking of the questions. So moving on to a different way of slicing and dicing opportunities at the port, which is going to be the large part of the rest of my presentation, is looking at these three major categories that our procurements fall into. So the first is construction. It is also known as public works. There are tons of opportunities there, and I'm looking forward to talk about that right after this slide. There's also consulting, which we also call service agreements. And so I'm going to dive into a little bit of that. There are two major buckets that consulting falls into. There is professional services and personal services. So I'll differentiate that a little bit further down the line. And then third, there is purchasing, which is also known as goods and services. And I'll talk about that as the third thing. And so I do want to point out there's service agreements and goods and services. Those are different things. Service agreements, it's really helpful to think about it as kind of consulting work, and goods and services really fall under goods, but the services that are provided aren't of the consulting kind of variety. And I'll talk more about that later. So diving into construction, we've got three major types of construction contracts here at the port. We've got number one here, small works projects. And these are the projects that are less than $300,000. These includes our on-call contracts, where we have businesses that we contract with, but they get work that is not that they have to do as it comes up for the port. And so there is certain ways of thinking about it, or requirements of, like, if there are night shift requirements for these kind of on-call things that come up, you need to have enough people that are available for that. So that's just one example of what to think of. Like when I'm talking about each of these different contracting types, there's a lot of different things that need to be thought of and considered in terms of, oh, does my business have the capacity? Like, even if we have the interest of doing an on-call contract, do we have the ability to actually support it? Are we okay with, like, you know, not having sometimes large periods of work, large periods where there isn't orders that you get, but then sometimes you might get them all at once. So think that those are kind of the things that I would like for you to think about as I'm talking about these contract types. I won't be getting into all of it because we will have Port Gens later on in the year that really dives into the requirements and the considerations of each of these contract types. Again, this presentation is really just to give you the highest level overview and a sampling of all of the different contracting types and needs that there are, just so you know what kinds of needs are that Port actually has. So with that said, small works, they're typically lump sum projects. I've got in the bullet points here some of the major types of work that get contracted out in small works contracts. We've got electrical, telecommunications, regulated materials, management, HVAC, and mechanical. Those highlighted are the ones where there's really typically the biggest need, but there's plenty of other work that we contract out for through these small works contract types. And then here we've got the second and third types of construction contract types. The second is major construction. So as opposed to small works, which is less than 300,000, this is projects that are over 300,000. These are traditionally low bid and lump sum projects. They also include federal or grant funding, which means that there are some unique requirements that might be attached to them that the contractor needs to fulfill and first of all know about. So that's major construction. Third, in construction contract types, we've got alternative public works. And that includes our job order contract, our design build opportunities, as well as our general contractor construction management opportunities. And I'll dive into these number 2 and 3, major construction and alternative public works, a little bit more in this slide, which I think is really helpful to show you some of the main differences between these different opportunities.
Yes, that's why I called it right back.
And just a friendly reminder, please remember to mute yourself. I'm hearing somebody who I don't think you want us to hear your conversation either. So right here, we've got major works, typically design, bid, build, low bid, like I mentioned. The design phase and the construction are separated. And there are WIMBY DBE goals typically included in these that can be found in the inclusion plan. And when I say that they're equity goals, which as you can see in that column, all of these contracts have equity goals of some sort. And that just means that those contractors who are the primes, the one who are working directly with a port, they need to make sure that whatever percent it is that they're required. For example, here under JOC, our JOC contractor, we'll dive into the example, is called Centennial. They're the prime on that contract. They have a requirement that 16% of the work that they do actually goes to women and minority-owned businesses, so that it gets subcontracted over to women and minority-owned businesses. And another goal of that 5% needs to go to disadvantaged business enterprises. And so that's something, when I say WIMBY and DBE goals, you'll see that on our Vendor Connect site, and you'll see that in the weekly opportunity digest that you receive if you are on our mailing list, what the WIMBY DBE goals are. And that's when you know, oh, this prime needs to hit this goal. They should be or are going to be interested in meeting somebody like me if I am doing the kind of work that is relevant to them, or that is part of the project that they're working on. So that's just something that I really want to highlight. If you aren't too familiar with that, please pay close attention to what, if any, WIMBY or DBE goals there are attached to different projects. So I will move on from this slide. And I do want to point out that these slides will all be made available on our site afterwards. So that's just a quick snapshot of construction. Moving on to service agreements. As a reminder, it's also known as consulting. So this slide shows all of the service agreements that the port typically procures. We get service agreements, contracts for services like financial, auditing, training or coaching, graphic design, marketing, computer, info technology, architectural design, engineering design, planning, copywriting, editing, construction management, you name it. We've got a ton of there's a wide array of the types of things that we procure in terms of consulting. I mentioned this a little bit earlier on. We do separate service agreements into the personal service agreements category or the professional service agreements category. And the way that where you fall, whether or not it's personal or professional, that plays a role in how the port proceeds and procures those different kinds of services. And that's why I want to talk to you about them and make that differentiation clear. So under service agreements that are professional, that is very strictly defined as services that are in architecture, engineering, landscape architecture, and land surveying. So for these professional service agreements, the selection is based on qualifications, typically through a proposal and an interview process. It is a competitive process in which consultants are selected based on their competence and their qualifications for the type of professional services that the port needs. The price cannot be a selection criterion, unlike some of the contract types that you saw up in construction. And then there's a negotiation process where the contract is negotiated with the highest rated, also known as the most qualified consultant who applied or submitted. The personal service agreement side is any consulting that does not include any of the ones that I listed earlier on. So if it's not architectural and engineering, not landscaping, it would fall into the personal. And so the expertise provided by a consultant here is typically for a specific study or a project or a task, and does not fall within our construction or public works category. Cost information is requested as part of these consultant proposal reviews, and the port utilizes the best value criteria to determine selection. And then after the qualification rating is complete, then pricing is analyzed. So there are, in addition to professional and personal services, which are two distinctions of types of service agreements, we also have different contracting types, and they apply both to, it depends on what the work is, but there are professional service agreements that might be IDIQs or project specific, and there might be personal service agreements that might be IDIQ or project specific. It really depends. But these are the main kind of contract types for service agreements. We've got indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, which we often refer to very quickly as IDIQ. And these contracts have a general scope of work with deliverables that are expected to be provided over time. The work is paid in hourly rates or on a lump sum basis for deliverables according to the scope of work. Some examples of this would be developing an educational curriculum and teaching classes to port employees that cover the same topics and curricula across a number of different dates. Or it might be photographing port events for the year of 2023. The deliverables for these engagements are similar and they're defined up front, but the actual execution could vary within the defined time frame. And so it's kind of the on-call like analog that is found in construction, but in service agreements. That's, I feel like on-call is what it is for construction. Its sister in service agreements would be IDIQ. So if it's helpful to think about it that way, it's kind of on-call in nature. The second type of service agreement contract that we have here are those with specific statement of works and specific levels of efforts. These contracts are finite and specific with a defined duration and time frame. There's a start and end date for the projects, and the scope of work and level of effort are negotiated upfront. So this is another way that our service agreement contracts are sliced and diced and categorized. It's by their amount, their dollar amount. And the dollar amount determines how we go out to bid, how people find out about it. So our category ones, those are the smallest ones. Those are the ones that are less than 50,000. In those cases, typically those are quite specific or niche in nature. And so one consultant is selected for these smaller types of work. For category twos, that's everything that's between 50K and 200,000. In those cases, we interview 3 firms that the port project manager identifies that makes sense to them. And there are WIMBY equity goals attached to some of these category 2 procurements. Remember I said earlier, it's important as a WIMBY to pay attention to these WIMBY equity goals, because if you see a Cat 2 that has an equity goal and it's posted on Vendor Connect, you will want to reach out to the primes who are signed up there as plan holders. And I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the very end. Category 3s are everything that are over 200,000. And these are all publicly advertised. They're all found on Vendor Connect. There are pre-proposal conferences that happen when it's such a large service agreements contract. And there are WIMBY equity goals that are almost always attached to these larger service agreements projects. These are some of the service agreement requirements, things that you should, as a business, have or be prepared to have if you're considering providing consulting services to the port. I just wanted to show this to you really quickly, just so you have a taste of what some of our requirements are. Obviously, we have them for construction as well. They're quite complicated, and I couldn't get to get to the surface of that for this this Port Gen session, but there will be another Port Gen session later this year that will be focused on the different requirements and considerations for construction, as well as service agreements and goods and services, those 3 main categories that we're talking about here. But here is just a quick demonstration of what some of the requirements for service agreements providers are. So lastly, we've got goods and services. Goods and services, as you will remember, we also refer to as purchasing. Goods is kind of self-explanatory, but it's actual just material things. They're electronics, it's furniture, office supplies, automotive parts, police and fire equipment. That's different from services, which in this category would be things that are kind of maintenance or just things that do not fall into the consulting kinds of work that I was talking about earlier. So services like catering or janitorial work, mechanical work, specific kinds of like CPR training or drug testing, window cleaning. These are what we consider services within the purchasing and goods and services category. And then the way that we slice these is slightly different. There are direct purchases for goods and services that amount to less than $50,000. And then in the category 2, the middle tier, project managers go and get quotes from different vendors. And in that way, that's how the selection works. For goods and services that are over 150,000, those are the ones that you will see on Vendor Connect, and those are the ones who are advertised. And there are equity goals sometimes on these as well. Though those can typically be found on our service contracts. Again, here's just a very quick idea of what some of the requirements are if you are considering being a goods and services provider for the port. So that is a very high-level overview of the different categories of contract types and needs that we have here at the port. How to engage, I think, is really important. So what do you do with that information? The most important thing you can do is sign up to Vendor Connect if you haven't already. It is the place to see and be seen. I am told by my peers at different government agencies that they use our Vendor Connect system to find vendors as well. So it's not even just the port like that you are seen by, it's by other government agencies and other folks who are interested in finding different vendors and diverse vendors. But for listed here, why you should register, this is where port staff go to look for different vendors to fulfill the needs that they have. And that's how they sometimes find the firms that they want to invite to bid or provide quotes for, particularly when they are category 1 and 2 kinds of contracts, so are smaller in size and don't need to be publicly bid. And then for the ones that are publicly bid, those that are larger in size, those are all posted on Vendor Connect, and Vendor Connect will notify you of them as they get posted, as long as you've signed up with a NAICS code that matches ones that are on that project. You will receive notification of that. It's also a way for you to be seen by primes. And the way to do that is to sign up as a plan holder on the project that you are interested in. And it's also a way to see primes on the project that you are interested in, so that you're like, oh, so-and-so wants to prime this. I want to talk to them to see if I might sub and help them achieve their WIMBY or equity goal. That's the way to do it. To go onto a specific project, go to the plan holder tab and see who's there and then reach out. So that is why you should register. It's also important what it is that you include in there. It's not very helpful if you just put your company name and just a few tidbits. It's really important to include, that's a typo there, your contact information. So if somebody sees like, oh, this is a WIMBY business that seems like they would be a good match for us, they should have a chance to actually have an email to be able to contact you. It would be a shame if they want to contact you, but your contact information is not there. Having your NAICS codes on there. If things are publicly advertised, but you don't have the correct NAICS codes or any NAICS codes in there, you won't be notified about it automatically from Vendor Connect. Make sure to have your business firm certifications. That's how folks know that you're WIMBY or DBE certified. And so for them to be able to search and filter for you that way. And then lastly, do upload a business firm resume. There are a ton of different, it's a big directory. And so the more information that you provide, the more useful and more likely somebody might be like, oh, I don't have to call this person for this information. It's all right there. And they match with what I'm looking for. I'm going to go reach out to them. If it's not there, people are a lot less inclined to actually do the legwork of finding out what it is that you specifically provide. Here are some other steps to take in addition to Vendor Connect. Do attend pre-bid or pre-proposal conferences when they are available. Again, typically those are for the larger projects, but those are great ways to network and learn about the port in a more detail, as well as the job, especially if you're very serious about it. You want to know what it is that you are pursuing. It's also a way to meet and then potentially team up with other small businesses. And then you can also reach out to the primes to attend different PortGen events, such as our PortGen First Looks, where we highlight different opportunities. And so in that way, you can see who is interested in those projects and make sure you get out in front of them. Lastly, please do sign on to our diversity and contracting mailing list to get our weekly digest of all of the latest contracting opportunities at the port, and also hear about the latest training and networking events that we have. Here is a list of the different trainings and opportunities that I've got planned for us. There is our PortGen 101 sessions that are all the things you need to different highlights of port business and advice. You'll be hearing from different colleagues of mine at the port about port specific opportunities and guidance that they have. Our 201 series is going to be offered in the fall. That's more technical assistance oriented. And then our 301, which is our mentorship program, and I'm glad to see Venki and Sharon who are here, who were part of that last year. That one is our most advanced one, and our applications to be a part of that cohort open later this year around August. So please be on the lookout for that. Some other things too that I really want to point out is our C1 project. We're having an in-person event with Turner Construction, who is the prime for that project. That is going to be held at the port on March 2nd. They are looking for a bunch of different WIMBY subcontractors to help them with the C Concourse expansion project that they're working on. So please, if you want more information on that, please email me for that, because I'll drop my email in the chat. We've also got an A&E, WIMBY, and Prime networking event that I'm working on for later in March and April. I think I saw Anindita here. It's something we've talked about and we're really excited about. So we're going to be, we've got that to look forward to. We've got the JOC Prime meet and greet. So JOC, again, is job order contract. That's the one where we have a prime already, Centennial, but they have that 18% WIMBY goal and 5% DBE goal. If you are doing any of some of the work that was listed on that Small Works project, I would definitely make sure to mark your calendars for that. That's coming up April 26th. We've got Project First Looks that are that highlight specific projects that are coming up well in advance of when they're advertised, so that you're able to network and meet the primes and other folks that you can partner with for those. We've also got our SeaTac Aviation Industry Day happening in June, and our Maritime Industry Day happening in September. And that's where those are showcases of those specific areas of the port, and where you'll meet the project managers within those groups. And I should amend what I said. Please make sure to be on our mailing list, and to make sure that it doesn't go, the emails that from that mailing list don't go directly to your spam or junk folder. That's where you can make sure you have the most up-to-date information. And you can also check on our website, which I will post on the PortGen events that are coming up. So that's the best way to be kept in the loop for upcoming trainings and opportunities. And then right here, I just wanted to give you a real heads up, a snapshot of what to look forward in upcoming PortGen events. Just as a reminder, PortGen 101s are ones where you'll be hearing from me or my port colleagues about construction, service agreements, goods and services, but it's specific to those opportunities at the port, or different requirements such as insurance and PLA requirements at the port, or bonding requirements that are specific to the port. Whereas PortGen 201, which is happening in the fall, that is going to be more general. It will be on government contracting broadly, as well as how you can work and grow your business. So that's something to be looking forward to. I also took a lot longer than I expected, and I know that Ron has a hard stop at 2:30, so I do. I'm going to switch a little bit the order of things. If you have any questions about anything I presented, please drop them into the chat. But I am going to let Ron and Harold take over at this point, so that they can get through the presentation, and we'll do questions and answers all at the very end. So with that said, I am going to, I stopped sharing, pull up the next slide. And before I hand it over to Ron and Harold, I just want to express how excited I am to have them here, and how thrilled I am that I think it's just so representative of how invested my colleagues are at the port in wanting to help women and minority-owned businesses, and how invested they are in your success and in assisting diversity in contracting with the work that we do here. Because diversity in contracting, yes, we are our own division and focus on this, but we really, really rely on the actual project managers, the people who require the work that I talked about earlier in the presentation. They're the folks who actually make sure and that do the work ultimately. We're here to help facilitate, but our work is not possible in diversity and contracting without champions and advocates like Harold and Ron. And so I just want to start off with that, and then hand it over to Ron and Harold to introduce themselves, and then I will forward the slides for you.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. You can all see how she's able to get us here by saying some pretty nice things about it. So that's her mechanism for luring us into this. But we're definitely happy to be here. And first of all, my name is Ron Jimerson. I'm the Director of Information Security. I'll be talking a little bit about my role in our organization and what we provide across the port. And just as a quick caveat, I'm not a contracting person, nor am I going to try to talk like one. So I will be providing more specifics about our requirements and how we utilize them. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Harold.
Harold, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry, I'm Harold
Great.
Federo. Apologize for that. I do that all the time. So yeah, sorry. Anyway, I do work with contracts. I work with the vendors, help get our RFPs in good shape before we send them out. And yeah, and we'll talk about IT in general.
Okay, next slide.
Oh, my turn. Okay, so the ICT department, so Information and Communications Technology, we deliver and support technology to help the port meet its objectives. So examples, for example, are network and telephony communications for the port and for some of our tenants, particularly at the airport. So for example, the network sits behind the Teams that we're all using now is something that comes to us. We work, we have employee workstations and mobile devices that we help support. One of the bigger ones is, of course, office and business specific applications, whether it's Teams, whether it's software for badging or whatever. And then while Ron tells us what kind of, or Ron and his team tell us what kinds of things we need to do for security, we're the folks that are going to tend to implement them, and cooperatively with Ron's people. But so, and technology resilience, that is, if something happens, can we get back online quickly? And of course, in the last 3 years, that's been a really big challenge when everybody's remote or were. So next slide.
So a little bit about information security, our department. In some organizations, information security is embedded within the IT department. We're separate here at the Port of Seattle. And our specific purpose is really to provide the strategies and perform the operations necessary, along with the controls for protecting our information systems. And with that, we deal a lot with managing, analyzing threats and mitigating vulnerabilities. And we do a lot of risk management on our systems. And we make sure that the controls are our technical controls, as well as our process controls, are in line with our security strategies. And that also includes an incident response component and IT security architecture. So there's a wide variety of things, but in a nutshell, we help protect the port's information systems, and hopefully we can prevent cyber attacks and things like that from interrupting our operations. Next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about the procurement process, and you can kind of step through these pretty quick if you want to, Emily. We have the ability to obviously buy goods and services below $50,000, which could be some of the things that you described earlier, like office supplies, things like that. And then within that category, we can have some consulting agreements, and I'll let Harold talk about that a little bit. Let me just step through a few more of these here, and I'll turn that over to him. When we get to $50,000 to $150,000 in goods services, that's where I think Emily talked about this too. The quote process comes into play, where we have got to say we want to acquire a SaaS application or something like that, and this is the amount of that we're looking at. We'll go ahead and we'll solicit 3 organizations for a price on the same type of product that is being offered here, and that obviously is a separate category for the consulting area. And what we typically do for some of our larger projects is advertise. We go through the competitive process that ensures everybody has a fair and equal shot at gaining the contract that we're looking out for. And there's another consulting component there. And then if there's some unique skills or services or products that are typically not offered at a competitive nature, something that's unique to a specific vendor out there, then we could do direct solicitation. And you can see the prices, how they're laid out right there. And then we have something called a intergovernmental cooperative agreement, and that's really regulated under the RCW 39.34 here. Essentially, is that there's other government contracts that are out there. We can piggyback off of those to acquire whatever needs that we want to fulfill this time. So I'm going to give Harold a chance to chime in here if he wants to add anything.
Not really. We on the IT side, a lot of our projects are pretty big, but we do use the 3-quote and consulting agreements. And just to kind of support what Emily said about getting on Vendor Connect, we have a vendor that supplies us a very specialized service. And I spent, originally when we first procured this, lots of time literally going through every entry on the predecessor to Vendor Connect to see if any of them could do what we were after. And so if you're not there, we won't find you. So please, to reinforce what Emily was saying, please get on there so we can find you.
Thank you. Next slide. So here's some potential IT and security contracting opportunities that would be within the realm of the within this year of some things that we're trying to acquire. At the top here, you'll see the IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity for incident handling. This is around $75,000. We haven't done any advertising for this just yet, but we will be seeking a vendor this year to help us engage in incident handling should we have an event take place that this particular organization that would be selected for this would help us out in that process. So this is more part of our resiliency preparation and things like that. And then we have an IT security assessment and consulting. You see $100,000 there. Hopefully we can we'll have that out there on future requirements as well. But we will be soliciting for a vendor to help us come in and give us some consulting and perform an assessment on certain pieces of our IT infrastructure, in particular that of our IoT devices or OT landscape within the port. So it's not necessarily in computers and things like that. These are more of the SCADA systems, things like that are out there that really run a lot of the manual operations that are, electrically connected and things like that through computer systems. So that's one thing that we're looking at. And then we have a government risk and compliance, we call a GRC solution. We're looking to kind of streamline, update, and optimize the way that we handle our processes towards policies and how we do risk assessments and how we handle compliance. And we're looking for a tool that can provide that for us. And you can see the budget at $1.4 million over a 10-year life cycle. And the last few of these, I'll let Harold talk because they're specific to ICT.
So we have 3 that we know are upcoming that are just partly examples. So we have an IDIQ for radio frequency scanning, which means checking out what other sources of radio signals are out at a new building site or within a building, if we're doing upgrades, that kind of stuff. We're expecting that to be approximately $500,000 over, I don't know, 5-ish years. This oddly enough is the one where we had a single vendor. And recently, and this again is just by happenstance, because I tend to meet with vendors who are interested in learning more about IT, which I guess I just let myself in for that one, didn't I? So yes, feel free to get in touch. And it turned out one of the vendors also does this. So now we have a competitive situation, which will change what we do. For private LTE, this is coming up. I don't quite know when. I should say the RFID scanning will be probably released in April. So a good time to think about that, to be aware of it and be looking for it. Private LTE will be an RFP. It's probably on the goods and services side. It's to, so if you look at your phone, some of them are LTE or 5G, and this will make it a kind of private version of it instead of the cell network. And then lastly, We are going to use Microsoft's eDiscovery, and we will need help implementing that. So that will also be probably on the service agreement side. It's hard to tell, as you may have gathered from what Emily was saying, the boundaries sometimes between what's on the goods and services side and what's on the service agreement or consulting side are not always super clear. So often a determination is made. In any case, we will need help with the eDiscovery implementation. And again, I'm not sure what the timeline is, nor do we know for these last two how much it'll cost, because we haven't really started scoping them out quite yet. And the last one is stuff that comes up, maybe specific training. Maybe Ron's folks have something that they need, something that, is planned or wasn't planned, but you all of a sudden identify a need, and then we have to go get it. I don't know, Ron, did you want to say anything more about that?
No, not really. With some of these systems and some of these services that we already talked about, there could be a training related component or another service piece connected to it. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind as well. That's all I have.
Okay.
I'd like to add, I know for some of them you touched on how folks might find out about it. Could both of you go over, like, for the IDIQ for incident handling, how are folks going to know about that? IT security assessment, consulting, and so on and so forth.
From my perspective, they should be in the future requirements under Vendor Connect. They can find out that way. If they're registered and things like that, we could possibly look at that an organization or a WIMBY organization that's connected to that type of service, and therefore we would reach out directly. The government risk and compliance solution that I talked about, the 1.4 million, that will definitely be an advertised RFP. Anything that says RFP out there will be advertised, and that's a way for the individuals or organizations to find out about. Harold, do you want to add to that?
No, pretty much. I mean, again, the private LTE will be an RFP. The Microsoft eDiscovery will depend on how much we think it's going to cost. The radio frequency scanning, that one's a little harder. Like I said, it's a very unusual skill set to have in the technology. So if you have it, it might be good to let me know about it. So then when we start looking for it, we can be sure to be able to tell you it's out there. And again, it will be on the list because it's a large project. We'll be asking for $500,000. So it will be on the Vendor Connect or the future requirements list when it comes out. But it won't hurt to let us know you're there, because again, we can kind of, when we know, especially for this niche kind of product, when we know people are out there, we will tell you, go look at this, and then you can decide whether to bid or not, but at least you'll be told it's there.
And we can do direct solicitation with some of these things, or pass on the information if we have the right contact information, and we link that up to the services that is registered for what a provider provides.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so we were asked to address project management. Most of our IT projects have a project manager assigned, not always, but almost always. We have an internal group of about 10 project managers. And then occasionally we use consultant project managers. However, at the moment, we have a preferred vendor. That is, a vendor will supply us project managers or software developers or whatever. That contract lasts for 5 years. It's up in about 2025. However, there could be an opportunity to partner with them. So for example, if you have specific capabilities, you can let them know that you would be interested in partnering with them to supply consultants with that particular skill set. The other thing to think about is that, particularly on the construction side, they do tend to bring in project management from outside. And if they're doing more technically oriented things, like some of the examples were, technical, like laying cable or putting conduit in various places, that might be an area to also be aware of, or it might make sense. So, okay.
Harold, Harold, I have a follow-up question for when you say there might be an opportunity to partner. How might a firm determine whether or not they might be a fit? How might they reach out to the prime? What are the actionable steps for pursuing
Well,
that? if
from our
it's
side, there
interesting?
really isn't. That is, what they would have to do is contact the prime directly
Mhm,
and see if they might be interested.
got it. And who is the prime?
Oh, sorry, it's a firm called Hansel Tierney. They're
Okay.
based, I think, in Mercer Island, if I remember right.
Okay. Yeah, it would be great if there's a contact person that makes sense for them, and then I can share with the group.
I'd have to think about that. I'm not sure off the
Okay,
top of my head who that might be.
great.
Okay, what we wanted to do was also interject some reality in what we're trying to educate everybody on, and that is being cautionary about your tactic and how you engage with the port. A lot of organizations like ours, and I'm sure your organization does as well, are often being solicited either through emails or cold calls and things like that. And we get that all the time. I've had several today already, and it's not that we want to turn people away. We do want your business if it's applicable to us, but we are really overwhelmed most of the time with just unsolicited communication traffic and things like that. So emails, they're probably going to get ignored most of the time. And phone calls, you'll probably get told to either call back at a later date, or you'll probably get kind of a quick end to that conversation if it's not something that somebody is directly interested in, because and they have the time to engage with you. So unless it's really, you can really make a compelling argument, and you've done your homework, then you might have better look that way. But I'm just trying to just put this warning out and be honest with some reality there. So next slide. Now let me dig in here on some things to consider when you do have a contract or an engagement with the port on the technology side, on the information security side. We go through architecture review and design and development with vendors, and sometimes we often run into problems where it delays a project, or we have to kind of change things drastically, or sometimes we get to the point where we can't even use that contractor. So be prepared to talk about how data is being handled, how it's being stored, how it's being shared with other organizations, other entities, even your employees. And we'll go through the parameters of how you're interfacing with our information systems. If there's going to be remote access involved, things like that, you need to be thinking about, how you're going to engage with us if you're providing a particular type of service that would require our network access. And then as a vendor, we're trying to put more emphasis in this area as well, because we all know the cyber environment that we live in today. Things are becoming more riskier. There's more threats actors out there and things like that are taking place. So we would ask that you're able to explain and understand what your incident handling responses and obligations and expectations are. For example, if you're providing a service, you're connected to our network, or you're providing a SaaS application, something like that, and you have a compromise or a security incident, you're bound to notify us and explain to us and help us, ensure that we're not impacted by that, if at all possible. And I put down here, NIST security standards. That's kind of a baseline for security for those of you that are not quite, involved in providing this type of service. Next slide. So back to integrating services again, and I talk about SaaS applications, cloud services, and things like that. And forgive me for using some acronyms if you don't know them. I can further expound on that if you want me to. But this is an age where we are, especially in information security, we are not a large organization. Even our IT department is probably not the biggest one out there for a port size of ours. So we rely and we're moving more and more to outside services such as cloud applications, cloud storage services, things like that. So once you engage with us for the type of service that you're providing, if it's a technology-based service, we're gonna do security assessments on it. We're gonna want to see what kind of controls you have in place. There's SOC 2 considerations. So these are just best practices and some security baselines that you need to be prepared to answer when we're vetting your services. And the same type of integrating components applied to the things that we have on premise. So if we're going to host something on our site, we need to make sure we've got those. We're taking measures to have those same type of controls in place. And then oftentimes we get asked about the federally mandated contract management capability maturity model. It's required for a lot of federal contracts and things like that. That is not applicable to us here at the port, in case you're wondering. So I wanted to make a note of that. And next slide. So in terms of agreement, I wanted to point these things out because sometimes individuals or organizations can be a little confused or taken back by surprise in how we put some of these things in on our contracts. I know Emily already talked about insurance requirements and things like that, but if we dig down a little bit deeper and doing business with the port on a technology or information security level, you may be subject to additional security requirements at the port, such as, multi-factor authentication, VPN, encryption of data when it's transmitted, things of that particular nature. And then if you're doing business with us, providing a service or a product, how you interface with our infrastructure, how the security codes you have in place, and if there's, you have to understand that we would be looking at examining your security controls and some of the protocols that you have in place, and ensuring that we're being alerted if the vulnerabilities or the right security patches aren't in place and things like that. A lot of what I'm talking about here is probably standard in most organizations like ours, and all facets of different industries as well. So these are just some basic elements to kind of keep in mind. Next slide. So I wanted to also make you aware of, the federal government has a lot of resources for, small and mid-sized businesses that they may not be as adept to information security, cybersecurity, and some of the technology components and how they're integrated so that they're not compromised. So I give you this reference here through the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency. They have a lot of resources. The federal government used to just cater to small cities, counties, and towns and things like that. Now they're opening up some of their or more of their resources on the commercial side, and this is an example of that. So this site here has got a lot of tools that they will direct you to in helping you put your security program together and things like that. If you're not already on track to kind of build your organization up to prove it's secure and being able to provide a service or a product in our organization. And next slide. I just stuck a couple of resources on it. There's all kinds of resources out there that are really tailored to a small organization, WIMBY type of organization, things like that. So if you're starting at ground zero, or even if you're just trying to shore up your program, the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, a government organization that also is highly collaborative with the commercial side and developing policies and standards regarding cybersecurity and technology. This is a great resource to help you build and mature the security in your programs. And there's a few more that I've listed down here: cybersecurity for small businesses. And the third one here, WATech, that's our state-ran information technology organization, and they're starting to build things for small businesses specific to the state of Washington. So there's a lot of resources and guidance out there that will help you, establish your program. And then there's an FCC cybersecurity small business. And I could have probably put hundreds and hundreds of resources out here, but these things lead you to other things that will help you with your program. And I know I've mentioned a lot about cybersecurity specific, but they also give you an understanding of the type of technologies and things to consider when you're integrating those technologies with other type of organizations, best practices, and on I could go. So next slide. I tried to talk a little bit quick so I could get us back on track, and I'll turn it back over to Emily so we can, if we have any questions, be happy to answer.
You're on mute,
Great.
Emily.
Thank you so much, Ron and Harold. We've got one question already in the chat that was for you. And it was, let's see, from I think Leslie, for any of the cloud hosted SaaS systems, is there a FedRAMP cybersecurity requirement? Or is there preference for this type of infrastructure by prospective vendors or bidders?
Okay, thanks. Seems like there's two questions there. I'll try to handle the first.
And I get the second one.
There is not specifically a FedRAMP requirement, although that would be something that would be more attractive in selecting a vendor for a cloud, for a SaaS service or cloud service. So it's not necessarily a requirement, but it would be something that would carry some more weight through the selection process. Harold, did you have something you want to add to that?
More on the second one. Yeah, we don't accept. Yeah, just the second one you said, yes. Anything
Go
you
ahead.
can show like FedRAMP will help. But on the second one, is there a preference for cloud over on-premise? Kind of. It depends on the technology and what it is. And it may depend, and it will also likely depend on cost. So sometimes we say when we release a proposal, it might say SaaS or cloud preferred, or it might just say we're agnostic. Convince us one way or the other. So it really depends on what it is. There's no general statement. Although I will say lots of vendors tend to be cloud vendors, but that's not quite, it's different. That's just what they do.
Let me just add a quick caveat to that too. The port is really technology integrated right now, and we got about 120 people in our IT department and about 10 people in our information security department. But we've got so many services, so many applications, and new requirements that are just popping up everywhere, all over the place, because we can't keep up with a lot of technologies out there, but we want to take advantage of them. So we are becoming more dependent on outside services for those SaaS applications, for those cloud environments, things like that. So like Harold says, doesn't mean that we're going to have those off-prem necessarily, but we do have a growing need for more outside services. Just wanted to make that point.
Okay. And Indita, I see you have your hand up. Do you have a question for Ron and Harold that's IT related? Oh, and your hand is down. Are there any other questions for?
I was speaking,
Oh.
that's why I lowered my hand.
Oh, okay, but I didn't hear your voice, sorry.
No,
Hear you
this
now.
question's not for Ron or Harold,
Okay.
but I just wanted to say, I hear you when you say, you get so many calls from vendors wanting to talk to you. And I'm just wondering if there's a way for you to kind of accommodate that in your schedule, because what we are often told as new vendors to the port, I mean, even though I've been around Seattle for 25 years, but, we really haven't worked with the port yet. We're told that you should develop relationships with the project managers and get to know them and so on and so forth. And a lot of other agencies welcome and encourage us to call the PMs when there's not a solicitation open. And that's a good time for the PMs to kind of talk to us, listen to us, and get to know us. So when new vendors don't have that access to you, I mean, I can see some validation and justification for hiring the same vendor you've been using for years, because they're the ones and you don't quite know the other ones. So is there a way to kind of break this cycle? You know, it seems to be, you know, it doesn't put new vendors in a very competitive light.
Well,
Yeah, and Indita, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really the purpose of these Port Gen sessions, and particularly when there are networking opportunities. This one's a little bit more informational, but I also know when after Ron presented at our advanced Port Gen last year, there was an advanced Port Gen networking session that occurred afterwards, and Ron was there, which is a great way for if you want to get in front of Ron or any other of our PMs, that's where they have set aside and our specific time, like now and like for when they go to these networking events, to meet with as many WIMBY firms and small business as possible and to answer your questions and to hear about it, your experience, etc. I totally hear you on having the access is really crucial. And I think it is a balance that part of why diversity in contracting is here for is like we help facilitate those connections. Sometimes those connections are one-on-one, which are very helpful. And sometimes they're in these larger settings. And so I hope that answers your question a little bit. Ron, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, Emily, about last year. I had somebody actually reach out to me, and I took their call. Actually, we exchanged emails several times and had a meeting. And one of the things that kind of drew me in was they had mentioned that I had spoke at the Port Gen. So at that point, you know, I really kind of felt a little obligated, but they really gave me some compelling elements to the services that they provide. So we had a good engagement. So I hope I didn't give you the perception that we're just ignoring everything or you're not going to. Usually if I get an email and I don't have time to address it, or if I don't specifically have the need, I will simply reply. I do make it a point to reply and say, you know, I don't have a need at this time. No, thank you. Or, you know, maybe contact me at this particular time or things like that. But I hope, and it is our hope, because we are moving to become more of a transparent organization, and we are being pushed. I don't even want to say the word push, but we're being motivated more and more each year to understand, you know, how we can make our community more vibrant, and by engaging with WIMBY organizations. So we not only receive training, we've got individual performance goals and things like that you know are encouraging us to and motivating us to make sure that we understand our community, what the needs are, and have those type of relationships. Probably more information than you wanted, but that's kind of where Port goals and objectives from our leadership are being pushed from.
Well, if I could just jump in a second, it may sound like the incumbent has an advantage, but it's not true. We've had where I've talked about as preferred vendor we have for help with particular staffing needs. The last 3 times the incumbent lost, we had a really good incumbent. They gave us a lousy proposal, so we didn't. No, thank you. Similarly, the last time we did it a couple of years ago, the incumbent did not win at all. So it may sound like an incumbent has an advantage, but it's not always true. It's very often not the case. When we're doing evaluations for these things, we try very hard to not give an incumbent advantage because we recognize the problem and we don't want to lose by it. Quite frankly, we think we keep getting better with the people we've gotten. So.
Thank you both. I really appreciate that. And Emily, thank you for all your help in kind of, you know, introducing this new climate for contracting. We're very excited about that. You know I didn't attend it because from what I understand, it was focused on certain sectors that we don't provide services in. So I was just wondering if you're going to have similar Port Gen conversations for other sectors. You know, this was kind of IT focused. So, you know, what about some of the other stuff that we might be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the A&E, WIMBY, and Prime events coming in the spring. That's going to be focused on that sector. I will have a construction port gen. So this is just the beginning where I gave you the highlight of all of our sampling of contracting here at the port. And Ron and Harold were just first step, but I've got
Yes.
we've got all this other work here, and we're going to dive into them to give you the more detailed information that you need for those different kinds of needs and contracting types, and have you meet the folks that are relevant to you in those for those opportunities. So thank you for helping me plug that. I did put into the chat our DC webpage, which does list our upcoming PortGen events. That'll get updated pretty frequently, but your best bet for knowing about the latest opportunity really it is to get on our DC mailing list, which if you're here, you're already on it, but if you're not, please be on it and make sure that it is not going to your junk folder. And so I do want to get to some of the other questions that were in the chat. Sharon, who I think left, but it might be helpful for other folks to hear the question and the answer is, she asked a question is there any way for small businesses to add unconventional methods and budget to help support the small businesses making the leap to commercial, industrial, and paperwork and technical requirements? And I think that's kind of more of a training question. That is what our advanced PortGen training sessions are for. They are typically very high, like informative about, say, bonding or WIMBY certification. But as I'm going into and planning for that, what we found was most helpful was the story that I heard from somebody who attended our last advanced PortGen, and they said, oh, I talked to Kara, the bonding lady, after she presented, and she helped me secure a bond. I want to have speakers who can speak, but then also have the interest and the availability to help individual businesses and individual folks with the unique questions that they have. And so that will be definitely a huge part of our advanced PortGen that is coming up in the fall. Let's see. She also asked, how do we get access to previous project documents to review awarded contracts or documents? That is information that is available through Vendor Connect. It is all publicly available. And that is also a great way to determine whether or not to see what it took for somebody to win last time so that you have that information. That's actually really great. Kind of like when your kid is doing homework and there's like a answer sheet at the back. It's like, oh, somebody already has an answer. This is something that I can go off of. Let's see. Leslie asked, is Vendor Connect for a multitude of different contract types? Absolutely. It is for all contract types. I want to reiterate, it is something that other government agencies use. It is something that our primes use to see who does what kinds of work, what kind of certifications they have. So the answer to that is a loud yes. Melanie asked, is there an email list we can sign up for Business Accelerator Mentorship Program updates and submission dates? I love how you're absolutely on it. And that is a great question. The best way to be aware of that once the application's open and when they'll be open is to make sure that you are on our DC mailing list. It'll be included in our weekly digest. There will be specific invitations that are sent out broadly to invite folks to apply to be a part of our 2023 cohort. Let's see. And then Aline asked, do the airline lounges seek vendors through Vendor Connect, or do they have a different process? So the airline lounges have kind of their own thing. They are able to see look into our vendor connect directory. That is something that my team in diversity and contracting is talking about, because even though the contracts and the funding is through the airlines, which is pretty separate from us, we call them tenant reimbursement projects. So they're really in charge. But we are in talks of thinking about how we might partner with them, because that's work too, and it's port related, though it doesn't. It's not something that we have the authority to oversee. And then let's see. Are there any questions that I missed? I know we are just at time at 2:30, but if you have a question and want to speak, you can raise your hand, and I'm happy to stay to answer any questions there are. Or feel free to type it into the chat. Okay, well, that means I think you got the information that you needed from this. Please feel free to contact me or Josie, who dropped her email into the chat, if you need any further assistance. Again, this is just the beginning. This is our first Port Gen of the year. There will be other ones that are going to be focused on different areas of the port and different port requirements that are helpful for you to know. So with that, I will be closing this session if I don't hear any further questions. Great. I really appreciate everybody who took the time out of their afternoon to attend this session, and I really look forward to seeing each and every one of you sometime later in this year, if not sooner. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.